Okay, so you're thinking of making a move to Gilbert, Arizona. Well, there's a number of videos on our page and others that will tell you all about the good stuff that Gilbert, Arizona has to offer, and there are some good things. However, there are most things that you won't find anywhere else, or some of the downsides, the things that you really want to be aware of when making a move to Gilbert, Arizona, because there are some downsides that you want to know. So that's what this video is designed to do. So if you stick around to the end, that's when the best comes. When does that start? Well, it starts right now. All right, so you've taken a look at the greater Phoenix metropolitan area. You've looked at Chandler, you've looked at Gilbert, you looked at Mesa, you looked at Tempe, maybe Scottsdale, and you're finally figuring out that maybe Gilbert's the where you want to be. You've seen other videos on my page that describe how great Gilbert is, and it is great. There's a lot of very positive things, but there's going to be several things that you really want to know about. I will call them downsides, but it's really just a matter of need, do you want to know these things? And most people want to hear about the things that are not so great so that they can make a good decision for themselves and their family, especially when something as important as buying a house and living there. Okay, what's the first downside? Well, the first one, if you look at Gilbert where it sits in the Phoenix metropolitan area, it's about 30 minutes outside of downtown Phoenix, and it's pretty much, it started out as a very small town. In fact, when I built my first house back out there in 1991, and population base was about 30,000. Okay, so since then, that population has ballooned up to over 250,000. And it's rumored to go, or projected to go, up to 330,000 in the next several years. So it's a very popular town. Now, it started out as a very quaint, quiet, little sleepy town, which is great. And that's why everybody moved here. As it grew, that's going to be a little bit more of an issue, because the hometown feel, Gilbert does a fine job of maintaining that in certain neighborhoods like Agritopia or Morrison Ranch and things like that. Lots of trees and green and good stuff like that. But with the population growth comes the typical headaches of population. So there's going to be a lot more people everywhere. And with that population, Gilbert has done a reasonable job of expecting it and planning for it, but there's still going to be the population related issues. All right, so now we've talked about the population growth, and grow it has. I tell you what, like I said, it went from 30,000 to 250 on upwards to over 300. So it's getting crowded in Gilbert. That's a downside. The second downside kind of flows from that, and that has to do with, public transportation. There's really not a lot of it in the town of Gilbert. Now, they do have buses, but at the same time, there's no light rail, there's no other really forms of public transportation available, at least not yet. The public transportation, or rather the light rail system, does exist in the Phoenix area, but you're going to find it pretty much north of Gilbert. As I mentioned, Gilbert lives out in the East Valley. So it's southeast of the Phoenix metropolitan area, about 30 minutes outside, give or take. And the light rail goes from out on the west side in Glendale, comes down, goes through, let's say, the airport, and then it'll go through Tempe and Mesa. But those two towns are north of Gilbert. So you're not going to see any light rail, at least not yet, in the town of Gilbert. What that means is everybody's going to be in their cars, because there's not a lot of places. Everything is kind of spread out. I mean, we're getting to the point now where we're rapidly approaching what looked like in California, to be honest, where you need a car to get around. I mean, you can bike it around, and there are some things to do short term. But as far as getting anywhere real, you're going to need a vehicle to do that. Now, what does that mean? Well, you're going to need to use the freeways. And the freeways to get to and from, let's say you're going to work in Phoenix, well, you're going to take the US 60. And the US 60, when I first moved out here, I moved out here in 82. And the 60 was barely anything at that point. And then by 1991, when I moved into Gilbert, the 60 was about 2 to 3 lanes in each direction. There were a lot of traffic challenges, because it was very much, at that time, was a bedroom community. There wasn't a lot of infrastructure. Everybody worked in the Phoenix area and commuted out to out in the boonies of Gilbert, Arizona. It's changed a lot now, thankfully. And what we're seeing now, Gilbert is serviced by 60. Well, US 60 is now 6 lanes in each direction. So that's a very big freeway, and it handles the traffic reasonably well, with the exception of course, rush hour. So if you're pretty much going into the Phoenix area in the mornings, you're going to see a little bit of rush hour. If you are coming back, you're certainly going to experience it there. But I will say, with the increase in capacity on the freeway, it's definitely made a difference. Now, going further than that, they've also done, or rather installed, a new freeway come across in the last few years, and that's called the Loop 202. The Loop 202 is very much a loop, as you see here in the graphic. It goes all the way around. Well, the benefit for Gilbert is that is on the south side. So if you live in, let's say, the south part of Gilbert, you'll likely use the 202 heading in or out of the city if that's where you're headed. So right now, at least as of this taping, it's not very heavily used, which is nice. I think that's going to change, obviously, in the next 5 years or so, certainly in the next 5 years. But right now, it's a very good alternative to getting in and out. So I'm talking about this as a downside being traffic. Inside the town of Gilbert, there's the population in the city. It just depends on the time of day. So the traffic moves pretty well, but you're certainly going to need a car to get around. They are taking steps to mitigate it, but that's just something you want to know about when you move to Gilbert. So things to think about. Okay, so we've talked about a couple of different things that are downsides for Gilbert. And again, not necessarily bad things, just things that you should be aware of, because not a lot of people are going to talk about that. They're going to talk about all the good things and never any of the bad things. So you want to know about all those things prior to making a move here. I will say the last one, perhaps the biggest one in my mind anyways, is going to be the cost of living and the cost of housing. Now, what does that mean? Well, Gilbert, when it got started, as I mentioned, back in the 80s, back in the 90s, certainly in 2000 and beyond, it certainly grew up. And with that, the cost of homes went up, the cost of living went up. Is it the most expensive town in the Phoenix area? No, but it's certainly up there. You'll find that Gilbert is now probably a close second or third behind Scottsdale, which I would say is probably the biggest one. Carefree, Cave Creek up on the extreme north side of town are the real expensive homes. But Gilbert is certainly coming up, and you're going to find homes in the Gilbert area. If you want to spend anywhere from $250 to $350, $400, you're going to be very challenged to find a home, a single family home. Now, you'll be able to find a real nice condo or a townhome, certainly. But as far as the single family residence, those are going to start in the $400,000 range and move on up to $5, $6, $7 million. And if you got that kind of money, you can find a real nice place, because there's you can buy land, you can buy a big house. In fact, if you take a look at some of my other videos, you'll see just what that means. And I've got them grouped and ranked by different price points, so you can get a good feel for what your money's going to buy in those various price points. So think in mind that Gilbert, great town, got all kinds of benefits, as we've seen in other videos. We talked about some of the downsides here. Biggest three here are going to be the population growth, the traffic, and of course, the cost of living. So if you have any other questions about that, by all means, make your comments. You'll find our information below. And definitely, if you haven't already, click subscribe and tap the little bell so you get all of our updates. And we'll look forward to seeing you on the other side.